Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another indoor air quality workshop from Pure Air Control Services. And today we're going to be talking about why a prescriptive strategy for school air quality is needed to keep your school safe. And with me today is Frank Santini, the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives. And of course, I'm Troy Raska, the Vice President of Marketing and Communications. I went ahead and sent a chat to everybody that's attending today, and that's just some housekeeping stuff. Be sure to check the handout tray. We will have this slide deck in there for you to download, as well as important documentation about some of the things we're going to discuss today. Of course, there'll be a short survey at the end of the webinar, and of course, we'll be distributing the video replay link for this workshop tomorrow as well. So feel free to put any questions you may have along the way into the question tray or box, and we'll either answer them as we go, depending on our time, or we'll just get to them all at the end. So Frank, welcome, and what do you say? Let's get started.
Great, thanks, Troy.
So today, just really quickly, we're going to try to cover a lot of stuff. Some of it you may already know and be doing. Some of it might be new to you because we have a variety of different types of people in different roles for education joining us today. So we're just going to quickly go over, why we want to optimize our indoor air quality. What is some of the prevailing guidance that's out there specifically for education? How are we going to plan to execute on some of this guidance and what is going on in our facilities? And then we're going to sort of dive into this prescriptive approach and cover IAQ and HVAC assessments and baseline evaluations, HVAC cleaning, restoration, building disinfection, a hot topic these days, air cleaning or air purification technology, and then at the end we'll recap some of the funding opportunities that have come up through this pandemic. So, well, let's go ahead and get started. So when we start to talk about air quality for buildings and schools, especially in particular, whether we're in the middle of a pandemic or we finally come out on the other side, good air quality just makes sense. It all adds up. And why is that? Well, one, we want to ensure safety for students, staff, teachers, visitors that come on campus. And so by assessing, diagnosing, if you will, and treating your indoor air quality, this is going to reduce risks. It's going to improve your maintenance protocols, right? And it's going to also help you, since the pandemic is ongoing, with proactive planning, just for air quality, ventilation in general, but also to tackle COVID and even other pathogens or constituents that come into play in school facilities, such as allergens or asthma triggers, or even a normal cold and flu season. And then finally, once you've planned and executed on those actions and have improved your indoor air quality, these efforts can foster positive PR for your school system, your college system, your campuses, to give confidence to your staff, to parents, and students alike that the right things are being undertaken and ongoing maintenance is being accomplished. So let's get into some of that prevailing guidance right now, because I think it's really important to understand that companies like us, right, Frank, we're not just out here making this stuff up. We follow the guidance very closely and align our best practices, certainly with the very highest governing bodies, associations, certification bodies. And so, let's start at the CDC, right, since we're in the middle of a pandemic. So again, you'll see over here on the left-hand part of the slide, there's a link to the actual documentation that this was quoted from. But the CDC themselves are saying that, reoccupying buildings during the pandemic, they're saying in most cases, you're not going to require brand new HVAC systems and brand new ventilation systems. They're saying as long as you've provided healthy code compliant indoor air quality, and we'll talk about what that means in a little bit, but as long as you're regularly maintaining these systems prior to the pandemic, that they can just be improved for pandemic occupancy. And usually that means using less costly interventions and, or again, prescriptions or treatment solutions, which we'll also get into. Frank, it's also interesting when we're looking at talking about going beyond compliance or going the extra mile or going the distance. It's Olympic time, right? To be able to manage these risks and ensure optimal air quality. Look at what the CDC says here about going beyond these compliance minimums.
Yeah, Troy, I think the important thing to take away here is that understand what the CDC and organizations like ASHRAE and the EPA are trying to communicate to the country at large, and the world's watching too. Obviously, if we have our druthers in all aspects of life, new is always better, whether it's new mechanical equipment or a new car, whatever the case may be. But that's not always the case. So we have to work with what we have and understand what goals are we trying to accomplish to improve the indoor air quality. And a big part of that is going to be dilution, by make sure we're having great ventilation and enough air pumping through our systems and getting to the into the spaces, and so that we dilute any potential aerosols in the air, because that's how the virus is primarily spread, that we've learned is spread through aerosols. But then also look at important things like humidity, which can be a big problem, especially for our areas of the country right now with very high humidity, as we get into school starting pretty soon. Because what you don't want to do, as we're going to learn more as we go through here, is improve your intake of, for example, outside air, but then raise your humidity levels above 65%, which is a threshold over which you start to have a risk, a pretty significant risk of mold growth. So just a few comments I wanted to make, Troy, but we're trying to just communicate for our listeners here some of the CDC guidance on this area and how it can be applied for your particular school or university.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, obviously the CDC is looking closely at this, and really, if you think about it, the Centers for Disease Control, Health and Human Services doesn't get too deeply involved in things such as ventilation, or mechanical systems, but they had to pay attention and work with others like ASHRAE and the EPA to help, set or develop guidance as we've been moving through this pandemic. And so, they're telling you to stick with that compliance, stick with those recommendations for these systems, but then to go beyond it, they're saying that, upgrades or improvements to the HVAC system will help increase the delivery of clean air. And as you just said, Frank, dilute potential contaminants. I think this is very important. The CDC is saying, consult the experts, right? Consult experienced HVAC professionals when trying to deal with this. So, we realize a lot of education facilities, K through 12 higher ed facilities, have HVAC maintenance and technicians on staff. But when we start talking about indoor air quality, it's probably a good idea to get outside eyes on the situation to maybe help with things that you weren't even thinking about, when you're just, in the weeds with repairs and regular maintenance and things like that. Also, on the previous slide, we showed you that link on the CDC site, but they also offer a toolbox, a mitigation toolbox that can help reduce the concentration of viral particles in the air. And so when they start talking about this toolbox, right, it's very general the way we're presenting it here. You can always deep dive on the CDC site, but they're saying each tool can contribute towards a reduction in the risk, that using multiple tools at the same time is consistent with their own layered approach, right? And will only serve to increase the overall effectiveness of trying to mitigate these pathogens in your building. And they're saying using these tools can reduce the risk of exposure. They can be universally applied across the indoor environments, but choosing which tools can be challenging. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit too, considering a lot of what's been going on with new technologies lately. And then of course, the building owner or operator, with expert consultation as needed, should identify which exposure reduction tools are appropriate in the building. You know, in different times of year, you might see different mitigation efforts. Obviously, if you don't have a modernized central HVAC system and you're up north, you're not just going to open up all your windows in the middle of winter. You know, so you're going to have to make some of these calls based on the season in certain parts of the country and what have you. And then we move to the Environmental Protection Agency. And again, the Environmental Protection Agency, even before the pandemic, as many of you are aware, has a very rich history in helping schools understand indoor air quality. So, you know, this pandemic isn't their first rodeo. They have an exorbitant amount of resources that you can go through that are going to help you if you haven't already. They provide regular webinars and training sessions and such. And so that link is right over here, epa.gov/IAQ-schools. And so direct from the EPA, there was two main areas that they talk about. And again, we're not going to be here all day talking about this. You can go back and watch some of their workshops, but the two main areas we want to talk about are their two frameworks. And one is the framework for effective school IAQ management, 6 key drivers. So this is what the Environmental Protection Agency is recommending, is that you evaluate, organize, communicate, assess, plan, and then act based on all of the discovery information that you uncovered in each one of these categories, right? And so again, this is consistent with how Pure Air Control Services, you know, operates our Healthy Buildings program. So again, the framework for effective school IAQ management, now we're deep diving underneath those other 6 categories, and we're looking at 7 technology solutions that are consistent with the previous framework. And this is, folks, direct from the EPA. Quality HVAC, so HVAC maintenance, correct performing HVAC, moisture and mold control, as Frank had just talked about, integrated pest management, effective cleaning and maintenance, smart material selection, you know, so furniture, carpets, things like that, of course, aggressive source control, and then energy efficiency. So as you can see, these agencies are all starting to align to provide this critical guidance that just makes sense, but also works to improve the overall air quality in your school. Now, a lot of this guidance back and forth between the EPA and the CDC, and even the Department of Education, as we're going to sort of talk about funding at the end, sort of revolves around ASHRAE, which is sort of the non-governmental organization that sort of sets the standards, right? They set the standards for HVAC and what have you in buildings. So Frank, why don't you talk to us a little bit about this ASHRAE 62.1 standard, especially when it talks about maintenance of HVAC systems and what they're asking facility maintenance and managers and HVAC techs to do.
Yeah, let's take a step back for a moment too, and just make sure we understand a few things about these last few slides. First of all, when we think about like the EPA's guidance uses words like evaluate and assess. This engenders a couple things. One thing is, you know, we've had some clients as of late, you know, approach us about our Healthy Buildings and Healthy Schools program, but they weren't quite sure what they wanted or even what was important to them. And that's okay to a certain extent, but you also want to come and make sure you understand certain basic things, like what higher occupancy areas in your facility you're more worried about in terms of areas that are going to have lots of people often. What's the condition of your buildings and your HVAC system, just from a general point of view, older buildings, areas where you're technicians and your staff know you already may have some issues. If you come with that kind of information to your provider, whoever it might be, your engineer, your HVAC mechanical provider, that will help guide the conversation to an area where you want to go. And challenge your providers too. You want to make sure that they're educating themselves on the latest and greatest from ASHRAE and the CDC. Are they really up on the extensive ASHRAE guidance that's out there? Because the go-to, the go-to for a lot of so-called experts out there is more outside air and install MERV 13 filters, which is perfectly reasonable, but you want to make sure that it makes sense for your particular system and your particular buildings, and also takes into account the specificities of your system. So a lot more goes into it than just putting better filters in it and bringing more outside air. And also, are they assessing and evaluating your facility specifically? So take those things into account. And we lead back to ASHRAE here, because ASHRAE, in their famous 62.1 standard, talks about the importance of maintenance and cleanliness of all these component parts of the HVAC system. Obviously filters, but much more than filters when we think about the cleanliness and sanitary conditions of these systems. And there's 13 areas that deal with cleanliness in just this one table that we're about to show. So that's a couple points I wanted to bring up as it relates to ASHRAE, and also how we treat and approach vendors in this day and age as we're trying to improve our schools.
No, Frank, I think that's a great point. And so for school administrators or board members, superintendents, I think it's good to question your facility managers, your engineers, your HVAC techs as to what's being done with this ASHRAE standard. So for those of you who don't know, ASHRAE Standard 62.1 is the ventilation for acceptable indoor air quality. So this has been thrust into the forefront primarily because of the pandemic, because it's a bioaerosol and being transmitted throughout the air. And so it's a good time to revisit this standard, but this standard has been in existence for some time, way before the pandemic. And so, much of this standard is calculating for ventilation in certain size spaces based on certain size of equipment. But when you get to Chapter 8 or Section 8 of this standard, it specifically deals with operations and maintenance of these systems. And so it's a good thing to refresh yourself on this. It's a good thing to push down onto your facility management team. Are you doing this, right? Because Section 8 specifically says that an operations and maintenance manual shall be developed and maintained on site for the equipment in your mechanical schedule, or what we call mechanical inventory, the assets within your HVAC system, right? The ventilation system operation should continue or be developed per this O&M manual. The maintenance for this system should be per this developed O&M manual. So, I mean, that's a big question to ask yourself or your people. Where is this manual? Do we have it? And are we operating by it, right? But further, as Frank was talking, if we look at table 8.1 specifically, and I know it's really small here, but it kind of gives you an idea of how it's laid out. But basically, this table goes over the minimum maintenance activity and frequency or cadence for the HVAC system, equipment, and associated components. So 27 areas total that they're talking about needing inspection and maintenance, right? And this also includes, as a side note, Legionella testing in cooling towers. They're telling you to look and test for Legionella monthly in the cooling towers. Now, this is also a respiratory disease caused by bacteria, and again has been around since the pandemic before, and will certainly be here after. But as Frank said, 13 of those 27 areas specifically deal with cleanliness. So are the coils fouled? Does the drain pan have biofilm or some kind of pathogen or bacteria, mold growing in it, right? Just a few of the things that you're going to want to be looking at. So all told, when you look at all of these governing bodies or non-governmental organizations like ASHRAE, it all points to knowing your systems, knowing the condition that they're in, and then being able to, in real time, make corrections, preventative maintenance, or if something drastic should happen, you're prepared to deal with it. So, you know, good stuff. And really, I would encourage everyone to go back and look it over. If they have questions, you know, start having those conversations if you haven't already, you know, within your groups, right? Your facility groups, your administration groups. And so, you know, that brings us to once you have that guidance, right? And we don't want to discount our local state guidance, right? Even maybe per county guidance, but then certainly, like we just discussed, you want to follow that guidance. You want to evaluate what you've been doing to date, right? And now that maybe you're identifying new areas that need to be addressed, new technology, new systems upgrades, right? You're going to want to look closely at this funding that has come out and procurement resources. And this could be the ESSER funds and the initial CARES funds that the clock is ticking on to spend, the New American Rescue, and then of course cooperative purchasing contracts. Anything that might make this process easier, again, because we're in a pandemic and we want to address these things sooner than later. Of course, you're going to just want to review everything that you've done to date, right? Like I just said, and then maybe improve some of those completed items. Maybe you did the best you could, but now that you have funding or you have a vehicle to move this plan forward, you might want to go back and improve some of the things you've already done. And then, of course, we want to take a look at optimizing those remaining areas that you haven't touched or things that have come up that you didn't even think about. So, I mean, this is sort of the checkbox for how you want to go about your, you know, hierarchy of planning. The conceptual planning, as it were, before you start knocking out these items that are in the toolbox. So Frank, you know, what does optimized IAQ in a school look like? I mean, what are we talking about here really as it pertains to indoor air quality?
Well, I'll tell you what it doesn't look like, Troy. It doesn't mean there's one product or technology that's going to solve all your problems in most cases, which has been a lot of the problem with some of the manufacturers and vendors out there the last year and a half since the pandemic came about. And also what it doesn't always mean is what I alluded to before. It doesn't mean you put MERV 13 filters in and raise your outside air and then you're all done now. It means you look at your facility and your HVAC system, and then really if you look at your facility, you're looking at your indoor air quality, and it should also include things like your health of your roof and your building envelope as well. And you want to understand, what urgent conditions do I have that I need to address right now? Now, what's an urgent condition? It could be many things. It might be an active mold problem, might be a roof leak, might be some very unsanitary conditions inside your HVAC system. It might be an HVAC system that isn't performing, and quite frankly, maybe doesn't have the ability to perform to produce enough airflow and ventilation into your spaces. Could be a number of things. But you want to understand your facility by assessing it. So that's what we refer to when we look at your IAQ baseline evaluated in the left there as part of this overall chart. And then from there, from the assessment of these facilities and your HVAC system, you can then address the urgent recommendations and then identify long-term things that you can take care of, things like cleaning and restoring your HVAC system, new equipment if needed, reducing the particulate matter in your facility through better janitorial practices and a clean air distribution system, and then look at some permanent solutions that can help you maintain these conditions, not only through technology, but also establishing a culture of, hey, we're going to take indoor air quality serious from now on. We're going to make sure our guys are doing a great job with preventative maintenance that take care of our mechanical equipment. We're going to put a renewed emphasis on the way our janitorial staff or janitorial provider is providing clean spaces. And we're also going to monitor our indoor air quality more, in a more robust manner from now on. And where needed, we're going to add air purification to our spaces.
That's excellent. I mean, what we're trying to demonstrate here through the guidance, through your planning, and then through these various categories, these 6 pillars of what makes up good indoor air quality, is that you want to understand what's going on. You want to diagnose the situation before you just rush into treatment, right, Frank? And I mean, we'll talk about a few of these diagnostic solutions here, right? How can we manage what we don't measure? So, and that's what Frank was alluding to with some of these HVAC hygiene assessments, evaluating your building envelope. You might be at risk, but since you never took a look at it, you don't know what might be coming down the highway at you, so you want to definitely dig in and start to look at this, right, Frank? I mean, you wouldn't go to your doctor for your yearly physical, and they tell you, okay, put this gown on, we're going to send you down the hall and take your gallbladder out. And you're going to say, well, doc, you didn't even, collect my blood. You didn't take any samples from me. You didn't even ask me a single question. How do you know that that's what I need? Right.
Except,
so it's the same
except
with
in this case,
right,
it's not. Yeah, it's not. In this case, it's not doctors trying to take out one of your organs. It's unscrupulous salespeople trying to sell you on the latest and greatest air purifier, the latest and greatest air cleaning technology. So that's the new snake oil salesman, if you will, out there. So that's the issue we're trying to talk about here. Is there are some cases where things are just so obvious. The doctor doesn't need to tell you what to do. But in the vast majority of cases, when we're talking about facilities, our HVAC system, indoor air quality, building health, you're going to need to know what's really going on through dynamic data, evaluation, laboratory results, sophisticated monitoring equipment that can tell you, okay, these are the actual baseline of conditions of your facility, and here's what needs to be addressed based on these diagnostic tests.
No, you're absolutely right. And so when we look at a baseline evaluation, exactly, we're going to have technicians out, industrial hygienists and building scientists that are going to, pull samples from the school, and it could be any number of things, right, that you're looking for to check up on the health of a building. That includes some of this envelope stuff like ventilation, CO2 buildup, any kind of volatile organic compounds, gases, odors, but it's also going to look at contaminant source and risk. Again, allergens and asthma aren't going away, in schools just because of COVID. So, any kind of allergen risks, bacteria, mold, of course, viruses, relative humidity and temperature, or any moisture, right? So we're going to look at the whole thing and then basically give your building a workup to be able to see the health of the building. And so you might find that there's many things that are right in compliance and are going well, but there might be some things that you never thought about that could be contributing to certain risks or certain risks that might elevate the transmission of something like COVID, or even, like I said, allergens or the cold and flu. And then when we look at the HVAC system, right, so we can look at the building as a whole and different zones within the building. And of course, the scope of work for that might be looking at an entire school building, right? Or you might know you have a problem, like Frank said earlier, and we might want to really forensically just look at one area because there's been complaints or you had a water leak, and you want to make sure there's no mold there. So that building health check is and that kind of evaluation is highly scalable. But then as we start to drill down deeper and knowing that this is an airborne virus, right, we want to look at what's going on inside of this HVAC system specifically. And, Frank, you've had a lot of experience working with some colleges lately and some school systems. Why don't you let us know a little bit about what this HVAC hygiene assessment does and what it's really good for.
Yeah, there's a lot of emphasis, as we've talked about in this seminar, and I'm sure that your folks who are here attending are obviously intent on self-learning and being aware of all the latest and greatest information out there. But there's a lot of information out there about, okay, let's figure out how our systems are working, our HVAC systems. So one of the things that we do obviously is we can test the performance of our systems in the facility to understand how well they're working, how well they're pushing air through, and what the static pressure is of the systems and all that. You can even take that a step further and go and do a full test and balance of your facility and understand the ventilation rates in individual rooms, what you're getting in terms of CFM across your vents and your ceiling, and is the air flowing nicely. You can even take it a step further than that and do individual tests. You can do some smoke tests in certain rooms and understand where how's the air flowing in certain rooms. There's some new technology out where you can spray some aerosols in the air and see where they end up landing in different parts of the building, and understand through PCR testing how they're moving through the building. But another thing that we do quite a bit, besides all what I just talked about, is understanding the sanitary conditions of your ventilation equipment, because there is a tremendous amount of deferred maintenance that goes on, and oftentimes it's not really the fault of the facility staff, because there's just not enough manpower and budget for a school district or university or college to dedicate the technician and manpower to environmentally clean their HVAC systems. And so what happens a lot, as you can see in some of these photographs, is that you end up with some systems that have a significant amount of mold growth or bacterial growth or both, significant amount of accumulation of various particulate. Particulate can be many things, from human skin cells to allergens and viruses and so forth. And it spreads throughout the entire system, not only just the air handler, but the component parts of the air distribution system throughout the ductwork. So the HVAC hygiene assessment will also look at these sanitary conditions and help the facility owner determine, do remedial measures need to be taken to address some of these unsanitary conditions. And remember too, we've talked about this in previous webinars, so I won't belabor the point now, but if you have an unsanitary condition inside your HVAC system due to the heavy buildup of particulate, that heavy buildup of particulate can also lead to a ventilation issue, because you can have such accumulation of particulate, it's obstructing your airflow and restricting your airflow and negatively affecting your ventilation. So you not only have an environmental hygienic issue, but then you have the engineering issue as well. So these assessments help you determine where you have these problems and prioritize and plan through very detailed reports what needs to be done, both from a hygienic point of view and also, depending on the scope of work, also from a performance and ventilation point of view.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right, Frank. I mean, these are invaluable, the reports that are generated from these types of evaluations and assessments, because they're, one, very detailed, two, you're using our certified industrial hygienist, indoor environmental consultants, right, where you're using our A2LA accredited laboratory, CDC elite laboratory, to look at the microbial constituents that are within these buildings and air handler units. And at the end, you get a comprehensive report that can very effectively steer this planning, budgeting, right? Because oftentimes things that you thought were gonna, spiral out of control, you're doing very well, and you might not need to replace 10 air handler units. You might be able to just clean 6 of them and restore 4 of them, right? So again, as the CDC said at the very beginning, we talked about it of this workshop, you don't have to just go out and always get new equipment. These kind of science-based reports will let you know what you really need to do so that you can spend this relief funding wisely, also so that you can be in compliance with the use of these funds, because these reports will back up the justification of why you're going to use these funds for what you're using them for, and it ultimately will help, should your school system or college be audited, for what you actually spent the relief funds on. And we'll get into that a little bit later too. So, basically what we're talking about here is, rather than just going right for the solution, let's step back, diagnose what's going on to create a plan, and then we can prescribe engineered solutions. So this is undisclosed, right? A confidential K through 12 school district up in Kentucky that we've recently been working with, and they did just what we're talking about here. We came in and did the HVAC hygiene and IAQ baseline assessments, and then after the completion of these assessments and based on the outcome, they created a plan and then used their funding to be able to go in and clean and restore many of their air handler units across the district. So it was very useful for them, and it is a good first step. And the other thing that bears mentioning too, compared to just going out and completely replacing your HVAC or just throwing new filters in or what have you, these are actually pretty affordable or economical, considering the data that you get out of them. And Frank, right, when we're looking at these HVAC hygiene assessments, we're not just looking at taking care of COVID. We're looking at creating a 5-year plan, right? Maybe a 10-year plan, depending on how many HVAC units, air handler units are in your inventory, to be able to really look down the road and do some really strong planning. So they're super valuable, and I really think that it's important to take that step back, know what you're dealing with, and then move forward smartly. So,
yeah, I mean, an example, Troy, would be, let's say you have $10 million in funds through the ESSER program, for instance, if you're a elementary or secondary education, and you're planning on spending $10 million on brand new HVAC equipment. Well, perhaps through doing a detailed assessment and evaluation of your equipment, you may determine, and this is pretty common, the numbers I'm going to give you, is that maybe only $5 million in the equipment actually needs to be replaced, and perhaps some of the other equipment just needs to be environmentally cleaned or refurbished in some component parts. And that might cost $2 million. And that leaves you $3 million of the $10 million to then use for other needs for the school district, educational needs, and information technology needs. So it's typically a tool to be able to use to save money ultimately by identifying the true needs for a school district, separating out priorities.
That's a great point. And so when we start to look at these prescriptive solutions, so the first two pillars of our Healthy Buildings program are diagnostic solutions, and then the other 4 are all prescriptive solutions. So when we go into that, we start looking based on the outcome of this HHA, as we call it, HVAC hygiene assessment. We start looking at the different priorities that we find by investigating these pieces of equipment. And so, the best case scenario is maybe you're cleaning these on an annual basis. You're following ASHRAE 62.1 and inspecting them every quarter and cleaning them once or twice a year, and they're all in pretty good shape. So, we can go in and deep clean them, to sanitize them, to make sure that we're killing any kind of mold, bacteria, viruses that are living in there, right? Taking care and flushing out all of that biofilm and latent debris. And we do this with a thorough deep sanitization of the coils using high temperature and low pressure steam, along with bioenzyme coil treatments. Now, this proprietary process that we developed here, that we call Pure Steam, is a 14-point checklist of items that we go through in detail, each coil or each AHU that we clean, because we're going to get in and do the rails and the blower motor assembly, the drain pans, interior of the cabinet, and what have you. And so, we have a very specific process with proprietary equipment that we've put together over the years that we highly train our folks on to go out and execute this work. And so it all starts with identifying how clean the coil is, how impacted is the coil. So we do a series of tests across the coil before and after cleaning to be able to determine the highest areas of impact, so our technician knows where to focus a lot of this cleaning, right? And then we can also do this after, so we can look at improvement to make sure that the airflow through the coil is back to near or at factory specification, right? And of course, what does this do? It's going to improve the air quality, it's going to improve performance, so static pressure now comes back in line, cubic feet per minute, so your airflow goes back in line. So overall ventilation is improved, because that's what we're talking about here. Hey, you can throw open all of your outside air dampers and bring all that outside air in through your filter bank. But if your coil's impacted, that's also going to impact your ventilation rates going out into the occupiable space. Of course, managing this and bringing these performance metrics back in line with specification is going to increase the overall energy efficiency of these units. It's going to reduce, work orders. It's going to reduce maintenance calls because the machines are working more efficiently, and ultimately it extends the equipment life. So it's a pretty quick process to do, but it's also not just going in with a pump sprayer and some enzyme or probiotic or something and just 60 psi hosing it down on the surface. This steam goes all the way through the coil and drops all of that latent debris out of the coil. Of course, everything is done under containment. We don't want any cross contamination. Water is a big issue, so we manage the flow of any kind of water or overflow or moisture. We're an indoor air quality company after all, so we're using HEPA vacuums, negative pressure, to be able to ensure that this is done at the highest level with no cross contamination or water intrusion, and just to give great results. And again, you don't have to take just our word for it. We do all of these studies. We've worked with third parties in many cases. And so here's just a snapshot of some of the results of this kind of coil cleaning. So we've done this in the case of sort of a white paper or sort of true case study, where we've worked with other organizations like the Continental Automated Building Association, where we just looked at one very impacted coil and steam cleaned one side and left the other side alone and looked at the improvement. So airflow improved 36%, the cubic or the feet per minute improved 37%, so consistent there. And the environmental improved nearly 100%, 99.98%, and on and on and on. Some of these things that we show here, like the University of South Florida, that was 500 smaller sized air handling units that service their student housing. And the ventilation or the airflow improved 38% after cleaning those. Static pressure improved 30% across 100 large air handler units at Harvard's medical school, right? And we show these resort case studies because what you can see in these studies is that, one of these, right, it was 1,200 fan coil units, chilled water fan coil units. So these would be very similar as well to like large student housing facilities, right? And so again, just tremendous improvements just by cleaning the coils with the steam coil cleaning process. So, do you have anything to add here, Frank?
Yeah, I mean, we just had an educational client where they were having some IQ issues, but we were there because of COVID and trying to help them create a healthier school and healthier building. But they at one particular school where they knew they had some ventilation and IQ issues, and they were assuming they needed some new equipment. But when we took a deep look at their air handlers and their evaporator coils inside their air handlers, they appeared clean. They had a pretty robust according to them, a PM program. But when we took the static pressure reading, drop across the coil, which for the folks who are familiar with what that is, it basically shows you how much more the difference in pressure on one side of the coil versus the other. There was a pretty distinct difference, and that tells you there's something going on. There's some blockage inside the coil, but it looks clean, right? So the problem is most likely that they've been using some kind of foamy rinse type of solution that was sort of cleaning the coil on the surface, but pushing particulate into the inside of the coil that can be unseen. And over the years, all that blockage just gels up and starts to really block airflow after a while, and also affects the way the air conditioning system can cool or heat, whatever the case may be, to provide the temperature you're looking for. So we discovered that through an assessment. And so now, based on the condition of the coil and some other things we looked at, we're going to be able to steam those coils, and I expect we're going to get a pretty substantial improvement for them, because the coils are in perfectly fine shape to just allow blockage in there. And that's one of the things that steam does, in addition to all the sanitary benefits. It helps remove all that blockage from years and years of either deferred maintenance or just the way coil cleaners act on coils sometimes, and helps free up that airflow. And that then in turns helps with ventilation. So you're solving some problems there just through what appears to be a simple cleaning, but it has a lot more impact than that. And so that's an example there of where you can take the information you learn from an assessment, both performance data and a visual assessment, and take an actual specific action that's going to have a number of different benefits for you.
No, you're exactly right, and that's why I kind of go back to this HVAC hygiene assessment, the diagnosis, if you will, is that in this report, these units are going to be prioritized based on the conditions from a performance and hygiene standpoint, right? So you're going to see it, like green is good, yellow is caution, or orange is caution, and then red is a very high priority. You're in the danger zone for what needs to be done. So oftentimes, green might indicate that, hey, you're doing a good job, let's continue to clean these coils, or maybe give you a deep cleaning coil, deep cleaning with pure steam every other year, and you just keep doing what you do on those units. But yellow might mean, hey, we need to get in here right now and clean it out, or maybe we're thinking of restoration. And then red typically would mean that you're looking at trying to completely clean and restore this, or sometimes units are just too far gone to restore it all, and you'd want to be looking at replacement. So when we talk about going in just beyond cleaning, and we look at restoration as a prescriptive solution, there's a lot of vendors or firms that might do one component of this restoration, and then another one might do another component of this restoration. But with Pure Air Control Services, we've developed a program to fully restore these air handler units all in one, right? And so this would combine the pure steam, deep steam coil cleaning and AHU cleaning that we talked about with high performance coatings, and then options for new insulation, retrofit options for fan arrays or fan walls to effectively restore an air handler unit for much, much less than replacing it, not only from a budgetary standpoint, but from a building disruption standpoint, from an operations standpoint, with downtime and what have you, and from a sustainability standpoint. So when we look at this restoration, Frank, I mean, it just really makes sense, based on these component parts of a restoration that you're getting. I mean, even sometimes compared to replacing with new. Is that right?
Yeah, and again, this all ties back to understanding your equipment, and you don't really have an understanding of it unless you do a formal evaluation or assessment, and you discover a lot of really unique things when you really take a deep try to get a deep understanding of your mechanical equipment. You see some disturbing things sometimes, but it's good to see those things because then you can address them properly and deal with them. But one of the other benefits is you can really understand, based on the conditions of these, each air conditioning system has individual component parts, and if they're not in too bad a shape from a perspective of globally and individually, they're pretty good candidates typically for refurbishment or restoration, whatever kind of terminology you want to use, and that typically leads to cost savings, capital savings, rather than spending X amount of dollars on a brand new system. You can spend Y and extend the life of that system and defer that capital cost down the line and still see the benefits of a like new system. So, for example, drain pan with a lot of these older units starts to get rusty and degraded, and that oftentimes, if it's not too far gone, it can be refurbished. Now, what does too far gone mean? That's part of what the assessment tries to determine. Is you use a number of different techniques to help our clients figure out what really needs to be replaced versus, hey, this is a candidate for restoration. And that's an example there. And of course, you see in the bottom photograph there, removing a belt-driven blower assembly and motor and replacing it with what's called a fan array or a fan wall. That's a technology that's going to be more applicable for your larger air handling systems, but can provide many benefits because you can have redundancy in your airflow. Instead of relying on just one large fan, you have multiple fans that all operate independently. So if one fan stops working, fans 2, 3, and 4 will make up the difference, so you don't have to worry about losing conditioning if you have one inoperable fan. Whereas with the old belt-driven system, if you lost that fan, then you were in trouble. If you're in a warmer area of the country and you lost air conditioning for the library or the half the school, that might be a concern in September when you're trying to teach the kids. So these items will help us through the assessment determine, all right, what makes sense for that particular air handler, and it's all laid out in the report that the client can then make some budgetary decisions about what needs to be done.
Exactly right. And other things to consider is, a lot of the fiberglass insulation over time degrades. Those fiberglass particles can be distributed through the ductwork and then out into the occupiable space where we breathe them. In the case of the picture you're looking at here in the lower left, that fiberglass insulation was moist and damp, and it started to harbor mold growth. So not only were loose fiberglass particles blowing through this coil, right, but also mold spores. And that could affect asthma again. It could trigger asthma or allergy attacks, not to mention more serious respiratory conditions should someone be extra sensitive to that. So, when we talk about the HVAC system as a whole, right, as you can kind of get the picture here, we're moving from the filtration and cooling coils and the overall cleanliness to the overall properties or restoration of the unit. And then what about the air conveyance system that's taking all of this conditioned air out into the occupiable spaces within your schools? And so that's where we start to talk about particulate buildup, blowout, right, Frank? That's a term you hear a lot, that there's blowout. And this is something to consider even if you're replacing units, that you're going to want to clean your ductwork, because you might get a brand new unit that is at a different spec than the old one, and it might just blow out all this dust out of the duct. So you're always going to want to take a look at the ductwork as well, and you're going to want to make sure that it's nice and clean. Now there's varying levels of duct cleaning, right, Frank, that we can talk about, but rest assured, we're an environmental company, and it's the middle of a pandemic. So, you're going to want to really question on your specs if you're going to go out to bid for duct cleaning, or if you're talking to different folks, what is that true scope of work that we're dealing with here? And again, during a pandemic, you're going to want to make sure that that they're certified, that they're using mechanically engineered methods that includes containment, that's going to address any kind of equipment that's in the ducts. And of course, we do just that, right? And of course, duct cleaning is going to reduce bacteria and mold from being spread through the ducts, or possibly even the virus, right? It's going to get rid of all these dust and particulates. Oftentimes, and not pictured here, but there's equipment in the ducts, like turning vanes and reheat coils that can get fouled, just like the coils that we were talking about in the larger air handler unit, and that's going to restrict airflow. They're not going to operate as they're designed to operate, and that could choke off ventilation in certain areas or zones of a building, right? So as with all of these things, not just the HVAC hygiene assessment, whatever work that's conducted by Pure Air Control Services is going to be accompanied by a comprehensive report of everything that we did, including any data collected, before and after photos, detailed job logs of everything that's been done. So again, at the end of the day, from a compliance perspective, you're going to have very complete service records of everything that you've been doing to accomplish your improvements to indoor air quality for your school overall. Of course, another prescriptive solution.
Let me comment real quick.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, we just had actually had a client call about this the other day. They ramped up their system to increase airflow because there's some complaints, and then one part of the building was an air handler that served multiple floors in the facility. But as a result, a different part of the facility had what's called particle blowout, which is, if you've ever been in an older building, or even actually sometimes a newer building, you look up in your vents and you see black particles coming out. Well, that's what happened. The increase in the system fan power and CFM caused the particles that were settled on the bottom of the ductwork to get stirred up, and they started coming out of the vents, and there was complaints from some of the folks who worked in that area of the building. And so that's a common example of what can happen. We're all trying to increase ventilation, increase the amount of air flowing through our systems, and this has been what's been happening. Is these are older systems, and a lot of particulate buildup in the ductwork, and you start seeing little friends coming out of our vents. They need to be, if that's happening, then things need to be cleaned up, because while duct cleaning is not something you need to worry about doing every year, it certainly is something you don't want to have those kind of situations where folks are seeing mysterious black particulate coming out of their vents. The other thing I wanted to mention, Troy, and this is unfortunately a common scenario, is we just did an assessment for a client a few months ago, and the client brought us in because they were still concerned about the sanitary conditions of their ductwork. In fact, they were still having particulate coming out of their vents in this scenario, but they had just had them cleaned 6 months prior. And so, is this possible? Is this some other problem happening now, or what happened? But it turns out through our assessment, we discovered that initial company, whoever they had cleaned that ductwork, had not done a great job. We saw many areas in the ductwork that was supposedly cleaned by another provider that was extremely dirty, for lack of a better word. So I say that story to really demand of your providers, if you're going to have an environmental cleaning of your HVAC system, your air distribution system, demand fantastic reporting on the back end. Demand lots of photographs before and afters. There's lots of different testing that can be done inside ductwork to see how much particulates in there. So you can demand NADCA, the National Air Duct Cleaning Association, has a number of tests that can be done to prove the ductwork was cleaned properly. And you can even go as far as having microbial tests done, levels of bacteria and fungi before and after the ductwork in the cleaning, which is something we do quite a bit, particularly in healthcare. So just keep those cautionary tales in mind as you're thinking about, acquiring a vendor for environmental cleaning of your distribution system.
No, that's a great point. To just keep an eye on things. Again, not all duct cleaning is equal, and you just are going to want to have a detailed scope, whether you're single sourcing or you're going to take it to a competitive bid process. You're going to want to have a very detailed scope for any of these services or solutions, really. But that way, there's going to be no surprises, and certainly we could help you through a consultative role with developing that scope. So that's certainly, if you would need help doing that, feel free to reach out to us, because we're happy to share our detailed process with others so their outcome will be good. So again, when we're looking at more prescriptive solutions, and we just have a couple left to go here, so we appreciate your time today. One of them is, of course, building disinfection. And Frank, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this. Most schools have their janitorial or housekeeping side pretty buttoned up by now, with the pandemic having sort of been in mixed operations last fall for school and certainly all through the spring. But just know that we sort of operate at, as an environmental company, a mold remediation company, that we can do this at a very high level. So should you have an outbreak or a special concern that might be outside of your janitorial's area of expertise, we can come in and do this decontamination at a very high level. And of course, we also have autonomous robotic disinfection. So these are like Roombas on steroids, right, with UV light, and sometimes disinfectant misters that can be programmed to traverse the building at night on their own. But again, this service that we offer is called Pure Decon. On a side note, 2.8 million square feet, I think 3 million square feet of the Jacob K. Javits Center that was used as a field hospital in New York City during the height of the pandemic in 2020 was returned back to public use, and we did these very high level decontamination services in conjunction with those stakeholders and FEMA to disinfect that building before returning it to public use. And so now, right, Frank, we're going to get into sort of a hot topic with indoor air quality, and certainly air quality in schools, and that is the prescriptive solution, which it should be prescriptive. You should have it recommended. You shouldn't buy these type of products on a whim or because you are rushed into doing something. You should really address the needs for these type of products. But anyhow, let's take a look at these air cleaning technologies and IAQ products. So many of you know, right, Frank, this stuff has been in the news lately.
Yeah, I alluded to it before. So if you've been watching this webinar all the way through, there's been some schools who've been embarrassed publicly, unfortunately, in the media for the purchase of certain air cleaning technologies. And it hasn't just been one kind of technology. It's been a couple different kinds. And in some cases, there was just a lack of efficacy in terms of what they were supposed to be accomplishing and what they were really accomplishing. In some cases, there was outright, things just were actually causing more harm than good. So there's a lot of concern out there, and really just the big thing to avoid here is avoid the tendency just to want to check a box and say, all right, I got something. I can tell my teachers, I can tell my professors, I can tell the parents we're good now. We put this technology in. Demand more from yourself and more from your staff than that. Demand that you have like this whole webinar has been about, demand you have an understanding of the conditions of your buildings and the equipment, and that you've made very specific improvements to each particular facility, if you have multiple facilities, that were in line with what that facility actually needed. And so not to say that air cleaning technologies, whether we're talking about UV or some of the other ones out there, aren't appropriate. It's just making sure they make sense for you.
No, it's a great point, and to just keep driving it home, the CDC has their own guidance on these air cleaning products, and of course it's a developing story. But look, the top line is they're telling you to make sure that you have testing data that demonstrates the clear protective benefit and occupant safety, and that testing data should be consistent with the conditions, the operating conditions that the equipment is going to be put in. And again, we can provide all of that, right? And then you're going to want to watch out for unsubstantiated claims. So you're always going to want to do your homework on this stuff and really find out what's going on. The good news is, right, is that we have a laboratory on site, A2LA accredited laboratory that has an environmental test chamber. This test chamber was built and has been in use for probably about 10 years now, I think. And so it predates the pandemic, and we test all kinds of equipment in it, different kinds of air conditioning equipment, HVAC equipment, sometimes even textiles or cleaning products, right? And so through the pandemic, other companies, of course, were under a non-disclosure and confidentiality agreement. Other companies have come to us to test their products, and we've seen wild varying results on some of these products. And some companies have heeded the science behind these test results and have put the pause button on certain products, and others, I mean, I can't say, what if they took them to market or not. But what I can say is that we can do this. It simulates a variety of real world conditions. So we can set up this like a classroom with different components in it. We can, inoculate it with certain types of bacteria, like surrogates for coronavirus. We're not a biosafety lab 4 accredited lab, so we're not dealing with real live viruses, but certainly all kinds of bacteria and mold particles, different kinds of gases or odors. And so we study these products not only for our own use to be able to know what's going on with these types of technologies, but then for our sister company who also develops and sells or distributes many of these products. Now, I know, in fact, we just got a question about this. I knew this would stimulate some kind of talk a little bit, but and this is perfect timing. What happens if I've already installed it? How do I know it's working? Hey, that's a great question. And the good news again is that our building sciences department, the very same folks that come out and do our building health checks and HVAC hygiene assessments, we can come out and say you installed $5 million worth of these products and you want to know that they're working, right? Or, there's a little bit of controversy or getting pushed back from the PTA or something. Well, we can come out and test to make sure these products are working as advertised. And again, we're a third-party independent resource to be able to put data on your table that says, okay, this is exactly what it's doing. Hey, you're good, or hey, you need to make some corrections. And so, we can come out and help you verify that. And this is, again, done by particle counting, looking at microbial counts or bioburden, ozone, which is a big factor here, ion output, volatile organic compounds, ventilation, you name it, we can test it, for these types of products, right, Frank?
Yep, that's exactly it. I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong if you've already installed certain types of technology that may have in other areas of the country gotten bad rap or bad media. It's just a matter of are they working properly? One of the things that we found in our testing chamber is sometimes we're seeing products that aren't even, an example of an ionizer, aren't putting out ions. So you just want to make sure that, or in the case of that technology, are the ions actually being produced? And are they being distributed through the facility like they're supposed to be? Or any VOCs in the air? And if obviously there's always going to be VOCs, so how much, what kind, how are they changing throughout the day, going up and going down? All those are things that you just want to know about your indoor air quality. Because again, the goal is you spent some money on technology, let's just make sure it's working properly. I'll confirm particularly if you start getting questions from your stakeholders, that you can say, hey, yeah, we've installed this technology and we've confirmed it through independent testing that we're seeing either an improvement or we're not seeing a concerning VOC, whatever your concern may be. That all can be done by a third party verified testing company like ourselves.
That's a great point. So when we look at some of this technology that's being employed, some of the newer technology, of course, UV has been around a while. I mean, quite frankly, bipolar ionization has been around a while, but is really coming under the microscope now. But again, I think an important takeaway maybe for this bipolar ionization piece is that there's different sizes of equipment that are designed for different sizes of air conveyance systems or AHUs, air handler units. So you're going to want to make sure that the product that you're putting in is spec'd to the type of equipment that you're installing it inside of. And so there's different sizes and types of these. So like everything from a very large bar that spans the coil to end duct systems, so that are downstream from the air handler unit, to very small size needlepoint brush ionizers that might go in more residential size units or smaller size units. So there's no one size fits all to any of this technology. And as we alluded to earlier, this needs to be done in conjunction with systems that are already clean, systems that are already well maintained, right? And that they're spec'd to the type of system that you're putting them in. And of course, these have been demonstrated over the years pre-pandemic, in casinos, food processing, other residential or hospitality situations to reduce odors, reduce particles, pathogens. It sort of helps filtration, by clumping particles together, making them stick together. We're not going to go in the weeds of the science of how this works. There's other data out there that can do that. We also have a solution, and we've looked at solutions that would combine this bipolar ionization with new fan technology to use to sterilize or to keep elevators safe and running. So if you have a campus that utilizes elevators, this is something that maybe you never even heard of existing, but it's out there, and it might be something that you want to take a look at. I mean, I want to be appreciative of everyone's time, so we're kind of getting up against our time limit here, and we certainly thank all of you guys for hanging on with us here. Of course, probably one of the most tried and true and recommended technologies throughout this pandemic has been HEPA air filtration, or high efficiency particulate air filters, right? And then any of this ASHRAE guidance, a lot of the CDC guidance says to make sure your equipment is clean, make sure that you have the properly rated filters in your air handler units, and then supplement with localized air purification. And so when we look at our Pure Plus Aramax, Fellows Aramax program, we've done an extensive amount of testing on our own and are very confident in these types of air purifiers. And of course, this is a multi-stage filtration system, so it has a pre-filter to get a lot of the large particles, which increases the lifespan of the HEPA filter, right? It has a carbon filter for VOCs, odors, gases, right? And then it has your true HEPA filter, right? And then you have the bipolar ionization piece that helps keep those filters clean. And, when you're looking at these types of air purifiers, these are wall mount commercial grade air purifiers. So the filtration access locks so that it can't be tampered with, right? So, when you're looking at schools, you want a device that's not just going to sit in the corner and get kicked around. You want something that is going to be mounted into the walls, that has professional commercial grade filtration. And then moreover, that it's smart. You don't want teachers having to go over and turn these things on and off at the beginning and the end of the day. And with these devices and similar, there's a smart capability to them. They sense when the room is occupied. They can sense if there's odors coming in, and then they can ramp up and increase CFM or ramp down when the building's unoccupied, which makes them energy efficient, right? They're also very quiet to operate. So they're not going to disrupt your school, where some air purification devices, which do very good, but they're almost like the big commercial negative air machines that we use when we're doing duct cleaning or restoration, and they're very loud and they could be very disruptive. So again, these localized or in-room solutions are a great thing to consider to supplement your schools, locker rooms, bathrooms, classrooms, administrative areas, to really, again, go beyond what the code compliance is looking for. And then finally, Frank, when we wrap it all up and put it all together, you can almost, with this sort of in-room solution and some of the other air purification technologies, based on the fact that you're using the ASHRAE 62 guidance and you have an operations and maintenance manual, your equipment is clean, air cleaning technology, we can almost create what's called a self-healing building, because there's solutions, prescriptive solutions, to be able to monitor the conditions of your building 24/7 and send all of that data to the cloud, and then be able to view it in real time, be able to take slices of time and look at trends. And so you can kind of stay out in front of any potential problems that might be coming up, or keep an eye on some of this air cleaning technology to make sure it's working as advertised. And of course, this is accomplished by placing these sensors or nodes that have multiple sensors in them throughout the building. They all connect and then send up through the cloud. They can go through your existing network, or they can be procured with their own cellular network if you're worried about security, or through your information sciences and information technology protocols. They can operate on their own, and it's going to continuously evaluate conditions. It's going to look at temperature, relative humidity, CO2 as a constituent for ventilation, your particulate matter, VOCs. We have units that will look at ions and read ions. So they're pretty versatile, and it's a really great, it's almost like, Frank, what would you call it? Almost like a home security system, right? Where this will notify you if something is going out of any one of these parameters, as you can see on this dashboard here. Again, much like our HVAC hygiene assessment, it grades as sort of green, yellow, caution, red, danger zone. So you can set it to text or email alerts to us if we're managing it, or your facility management team. So it's a very good tool in the toolbox once you've accomplished all of the other things and have optimized your indoor air quality to be able to employ. So, Frank, why don't we talk a little bit about how some of our, current customers are using this, especially some recent colleges that have adopted this healthy building program, or this prescriptive IAQ program.
Yeah, as we discussed earlier in the program, that you're trying to not only address urgent issues and fix obvious remedial issues and replace equipment needs to be replaced, or whatever the case may be in terms of facility upgrades, but you're trying to maintain and keep a situation, a condition in which your facility is going to be in a great place in indoor air quality wise, and you can prove it. And so what better way to do that by actually having real-time data to be able to track the major indoor air quality parameters that Troy just eloquated, and be able to put that on a dashboard, sometimes into an app that the school or university may use, sometimes on a monitor, and if the building has a lobby television, so you can assign a score, IAQ score, based on the aggregate IAQ data found from the sensors within that building. So that's really what we're trying to accomplish here. Track the data to be able to avoid situations, because you're able to catch IAQ problems before they become a concern by tracking the data, and also be able to prove to constituents and stakeholders that, hey, we're doing this, and we're really trying our best to make sure we have a safe and healthy environment for you. And so that's been exceptional in those areas, and that's why it's been a very popular product for us.
No, it truly has. And so, all told, once all of these pillars are being implemented, how is this helping some of our recent college customers and some of our education customers?
Yeah, I mean, so for example, you might have a situation like we just had in the school in North Carolina where there was some humidity concerns that we identified through our sensing technology in parts of the building, where it was hanging around 69, 70% for a long time, and that kind of humidity level can eventually lead to mold growth after just really a couple of days. So we're able to catch that, when that was happening, so that the situation can be addressed. And sometimes it's a simple solution. It might be an issue with a damper or a concern with a component part of HVAC system. Sometimes it's another issue. Perhaps it might be a building envelope issue, or it's just some simple concern that could easily be addressed. But had it not been addressed in that particular area of this school facility in North Carolina, would have had undoubtedly had some mold issues in that particular section of the building. So that's just one example. Another example is we have a lot of clients who've installed MERV 13 or MERV 14 filtration, and they're spending a lot of money on filters, and so these air quality sensors have particulate counters and monitoring abilities on them, so you can measure different sizes of particles in the air. And so if your filtration is working properly, and assuming your janitorial provider or janitorial staff are doing a great job, and assuming there's no other ancillary issue, your particle counts should be below a certain level in your areas where you have the sensors. So if they're not, then okay, maybe we have a filter issue, or maybe we have some other issue that we need to address. So that's another example of an issue that can be identified. And a third example, as particularly relevant for the topic of ventilation and COVID, is carbon dioxide, CO2. I mean, our facilities would should always try to be less than 700 parts per million if they're occupied in CO2, and that can kind of also be a proxy for ventilation. So that if your ventilation is pretty good, your CO2 should stay around below that level. But if it's not, if it starts peaking up a little higher, then that could be a nice indicator for you that you need to make some changes, either engineering, mechanically, or perhaps, like I alluded to before, a hygienic issue that's obstructing the airflow. Make some changes that will adjust the system so that you're not having your CO2 peak, because that's a concern, because you don't want to have a lack of ventilation. And also CO2 itself being high leads to sleepiness and people being lethargic. So it has its own problems by itself, particularly in schools. We don't want our kids sleeping. We want them learning. So there's a couple of examples for you, Troy.
Yeah, and once all of these diagnostic solutions are undertaken, and then we start doing the prescriptive solutions, there's been quite a few colleges that we're working with that have done these recommendations, that have undertaken this healthy buildings program. And so, and not just in one or two buildings, but across the entire campus of buildings. And so we've come in, we've done the HVAC hygiene assessments, packaged up these reports. They were able to take this information in conjunction with our baseline testing and start to prioritize needs in the buildings themselves and the equipment. And then we started the implementation of actually doing the HVAC cleaning and restoration based on that prioritization. And in so doing, we're able to also offer up our expertise as part of this Healthy Buildings program to come on a Zoom call, a weekly faculty Zoom call, or a roundtable or town hall type format, if you will, where our experts, our Chief Scientific Officer from our laboratory, Dr. Sahai, who's been on many workshops with me, our Director of Building Sciences, Francisco Aguirre, or even some of our technicians will come on these calls and allow all of the stakeholders at this college to ask questions, to be able to answer questions. And it's a very good way to keep everybody involved in your school aware of everything that's going on, have some of their questions addressed. And so we're doing this on a weekly basis as part of this Healthy Buildings program. while this is being implemented. And then, of course, once everything is cleaned up, we're helping them spec and implement the right air cleaning technology for their systems and for their buildings. And so these have been a very big success because, again, you know, we don't want to just come in and sell you something and get out. We want to become a partner. We want to invest in your school system or your college system to be able to make sure that ultimately you have a successful outcome. And so, I mean, I know we're running over at this point, Frank, so I don't feel like we have to spend a lot on the funding piece about how this funding can specifically be used and the language in this funding and in these appropriations bills is very specific to indoor air quality and even more specific now to HVAC and the American Rescue Plan. But these are the current plans that are on the table and the funds that have been released. And I really think, Frank, here on this slide, you know, moreover than just showing what everybody's getting and all that, I think the spending due date, you know, with the caveat that some is as late as listed in these calendar month and calendar years, is the spending deadlines are still a little bit down the road here. And so because this funding is coming, you don't have to feel the need to spend it all right away or spend it as soon as you get it. You do have the luxury of taking time to step back and be smart about what your expenditures are going to go on by doing these types of diagnostic protocols to be able to assess the conditions for air quality in your buildings and in your HVAC systems, to be able to then come to your board of directors, to your school board, board of regents to say, hey, this is our plan, this is the science that it's based on. You know, let's start knocking these 6 critical pillars for air quality down and really addressing it and buttoning it up. The other thing that I think that bears mentioning here relative to the funding is we've helped many schools, right? Maybe you can take us through an example, Frank, where we've come in more as a consultant because they want to sort of get, you know, like a ballpark figure for what something would look like from the assessment, and then maybe, let's say, middle or worst case scenario for the treatment or prescriptive options, so that they can start to try to at least set aside or allocate the maintenance I'm talking about here now, facility division, that they can set aside and allocate some of this funds without having every single detail ironed out yet. Is that right? Have you been working with some folks like that, Frank?
Yeah, that's right, Troy. And, you know, it's important to understand that we want to spend this money wisely. And I don't think I need to tell folks that who are reading or watching this, who are CFOs or, you know, a lot of folks we deal with, they really take the job seriously and really want to make sure they're doing the right thing with this influx of federal funds. You know, there is a lot of flexibility in how they can be spent. Obviously, there are some exceptions where they can't be spent on certain items. And then another thing to keep in mind too, Troy, is that, you know, there were some frequently asked questions released by the Department of Education back in May. Because we recently had one of our clients ask if they could spend the ESSER 1 money on the same thing they were spending ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds on, which is something that's set forth in the frequently asked questions, that, you know, that you're allowed to utilize the allowable uses under ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, which are much more robust, even if it happens to be a bundle from the ESSER 1, the CARES Act. So
no, you're absolutely right. And they also said that many of the gear funds can also be used for the same activities as the ESSER funds. And so again, when we got to the American Rescue Plan, they got very specific. The CARES Act was a little more vague in what you were entitled or allowed to spend the funds on. But by the time we get to the American Rescue Plan, it specifically says facility repairs and improvements to enable operation of schools to reduce the risk of the transmission of the virus, environmental health hazards, right? It also really went into detail for the, guess what, inspection, testing, maintenance, repair, replacement, and upgrade projects to improve indoor air quality. That's verbatim right out of the American Rescue Plan. And of course, including ventilation and air conditioning systems and other cleaning devices. So as Frank said, retroactively, this language now is applied back to the CARES Act, and you're able to use any of the money from any of the funds to be able to do just that: test, inspect, maintain, upgrade, improve these HVAC systems. And again, right from the Department of Education, you can use it to improve and enable schools to reduce the risk of the virus transmission, environmental health hazards, right? Inspection, testing, maintenance, repair, replacement, and upgrades to improve indoor air quality. You know, including non-mechanical heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, filtration, purification, and other air cleaning, fans, control systems, window, door repair, etc. So just really great stuff. Of course, now in CARES, a lot of colleges felt left out because it did seem to be more geared toward K through 12. But of course, the American Rescue Plan has clarified that, and we can also begin to use it for colleges as well. So again, you know, right in our own backyard, St. Petersburg College went ahead and did an HVAC hygiene assessment across one of their campus buildings. And then after the assessments came back in, they used those assessments as their justification to allocate and use this relief funding to go ahead and move forward with cleaning and restoring their air handler units. So,
Yeah, and also
really great stuff.
Your place too, Troy.
Yes, that's exactly right. So, I mean, that about wraps it up. You guys have been really attentive. We thank you for hanging in there with us. We went well over time, but of course, as we're all getting ready to get back in school, these are all very important topics, and we always are willing to share our expertise with you and invite questions. I don't really see any more questions to come up, and I think that's okay. You can always email us. But suffice to say, we've been around since 1984. We have 3 specialized divisions that deal with each specific area of this equipment and buildings. And we have an extensive background in the education marketplace. Of course, we have a lot of cooperative purchasing contracts through education cooperatives, so those are certainly available for you to be able to be used. And just once again, I'm Troy. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Communications for Pure Air Control Services. And I thank you, Frank, for being on with us today. And again, any questions, here's our contact information. We will absolutely get back with you promptly and try to help you out.